And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Hello, Nora. How are you doing this morning?
Well, Brian, very well, very well. It's life is we were mentioning earlier. Spring is springing, and we're both sneezing. So there you go. It's like pollen everywhere.
This morning, I was working with a client who was doing bridges, and my eyes started watering. And I said, "Sorry, it's allergies." And I sort of joked, and I was saying, "No, no, bridges just make me so teary. They're so sad." And I said, "I don't know what's going on. We got the pollen in the air, and now my eyes are watering, and it looks like I'm crying at everything." But that'll last for a few weeks. Here in DC, we just had a massive cherry blossom. Oh, I'll just share this with all of our listeners. Huge cherry blossom festival, much like Japan has. We have here in Washington D.C. down by the what we call the mall, which is the area that there all the monuments and whatnot. Tons of cherry blossoms. The metro here had over 500 and I think it was 538,000 people ride
Holy moly!
between opening time on Saturday and 6 p.m. It was the third highest ridership ever for a single day.
Holy moly!
If you looked at the map on, the traffic map, everything was red going into and out of the city. Everything was basically a parking lot. I was very happy, so happy that I lived outside of the city for once.
Oh
I
my
say,
God! What a
I
craziness!
yeah, so this time of year here, it is crazy because of that, crazy because of the tourists, but oh my gosh, everything's in bloom and we're all going to be feeling it and our cars are going to be nothing but green for the next couple of weeks and it's just the way it is. That's life on the East Coast and it sounds like the same thing in Sacramento.
Yeah, not quite as bad. My brother lives back there, and I was back there for his wedding in June many, many, many years ago and went on a bike trip. And all I remember coming home with is just like stuff pouring out of my nose. Because, we were on this bike, we were on the tow path next to the
Yep.
Potomac or whatever,
Oh
right? So
yeah.
we're riding up there on the bike, and it was just, you could just see the pollen just floating in the air. And my nose was like, I'm not having any of this. Like for a week later, I was just pouring, trying to get whatever that was out of me. It's like, stop
I,
pollinating me. I am not a
I will
flower.
say
Go
the
away.
one thing about wearing a mask,
Yeah.
it really did come in handy. Now, say what you will, hard to breathe through. But
Yeah.
when you're walking and hiking in that nasty pollen, at least that was able to filter out some, but you'd come back and the mask would be pure green. I mean, it
Oh,
was ridiculous the amount of pollen that is in this area. Yeah. And
man.
it's just what we have to put up with, for a few weeks. And then hopefully everything, clears out and everything will be 105 degrees. No, not quite that hot, but
It'll be hot and
you get the
sticky.
hundreds, we get the humidity. So, we're both going to
Exactly.
experience the heat. Well, our last session, we talked a
Yeah.
lot about osteoporosis.
Hmm.
We covered a lot in the hour that we spent with you and forgot a couple of things, and we're going to go over that. We're going to talk about a little bit more in detail about exercise programming today when it comes to osteoporosis. And I just said basically everything from conservative to controversial because there's a lot within that spectrum. And I
Yeah.
think it'd be a good idea for us to sort of cover a little bit of all of it to sort of show where it is that line and what should you do, what should you not do, and all of that, because we do have contraindications, obviously, and we do have here's the safest, most protective method. And then we need to figure out, okay, where do we want to train our people, depending on what they have and the client in front of us and what the doctor has said. But
And what their
before we
goals
get into
are.
that, yeah, before we get into that, do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Comment on us on your platform of your choice, also through Instagram, Moving Combos, as well as movingcombos@gmail.com. Easiest way to get in touch with us. And let's dive into a little bit more of osteoporosis with a little bit of programming and anything that we forgot to mention last time. Because I don't know about you, but every time we sort of stop and hit the stop button on the recording, it's like, oh, we forgot this. Oh, we forgot that. So this gives us an
Exactly.
opportunity to catch that up a little bit.
That's right. So let's start with a little bit of that. So one of the things that we didn't mention last time, and a lot of times, Brian and I kind of assume a certain level of background, and sometimes that's not the right idea. So one of the things that we wanted to mention was one of the biggest challenges with osteoporosis is clients don't know they have it. It's
Yeah.
it's a symptom-free, absolutely symptom-free condition until you fracture something.
Yep.
And the biggest challenge with that we've found is the psychological challenge of a
Yeah.
client who has no symptoms, doesn't feel like anything's wrong, and are told they can't lean over and tie their shoes or pick up their child or play golf anymore, right? So
Mhm.
so that's really one of the biggest issues that we have is clients who, Brian used an example last time of one of his clients who was very active and a cyclist and a rollerblader who suddenly gets that diagnosis and comes in like, I can't move. What am I going to
Yep.
do? Like, I can't do anything anymore that I like doing. And, my example is, again, I teach Pilates teacher training, and I've had more than one group where one or two of the participants have been diagnosed with osteoporosis during the training. So clients who were doing short spine yesterday can't do
Yeah.
short spine today. And they're like, why? I felt fine, da da da. So that's partly why we wanted to bring this up, was just because this is real, and you're going to have so many clients go through this, and how do we handle that, and how do we keep them safe while still allowing them to keep moving?
Yeah, and I love the term you use is doctors have a tendency to put the fear of God into people, that
Yep.
if you move, if you've bent over one time, you're gonna fracture your spine and you're never gonna walk again, and you're gonna be in here. And look, I totally understand where a lot of physicians are coming from because people often don't hear them when they tell them something. I've talked to a number of doctors who have actually given people diagnoses that are very, very serious, and the doctor says it, but the person literally doesn't hear the words.
Yep.
I have a family member who had a heart attack and was in the hospital, and I went in and flew in and was trying to figure out what was going on, and they said, "They won't tell us anything. They won't tell us anything." So I cornered the doctor, and I'm being very, hands up, and I'm like, "Why won't you say anything?" He said, "I've told her she's had a
Yeah.
heart attack, knowing they're not hearing me." And it was at
hmm
that moment that I said, "Oh, this is a very real thing."
This is a very
So
real thing. Yeah.
I get the doctor saying, "Look, you need to be careful. You need to be protective of this. You need to take proactive measures in order to prevent those fractures."
Mhm.
But putting the fear of God into someone so that they don't move again, that can be very contradictory to what they need to do because they need to move and they need to do weight bearing exercise.
Right. So how do they do weight bearing exercise safely?
Yeah.
Right, and how do they do it not just safely, but progressively? To bring up I think of the clients I talked about last time, right? She was a regular runner, but she'd been
Mhm.
running the same amount for 10 years. So her bones had accommodated to that and actually were no longer going to be gaining density because the challenge wasn't new to the bones. The bones were like, yeah, yeah, I can handle this. I'm not being stimulated by something new. And that's one of the things I think is again, we'll come back to this, but I think that's an interesting piece is keeping things stimulated in new ways for clients,
Yes.
right? Especially when you've got an older client or you've got a client who just really isn't that physically active and is kind of coming to you because they know it's better for them, but it's not like something they're going to take on a lot on their own. You're trying to keep them moving and keep them progressing can be kind of a challenge because sometimes they can't do a lot of things.
Mhm.
So you're kind of like, okay, well, how do I just increase load with these, this series of exercises this client can do well and safely?
Mhm.
There's some
Stimulation,
challenges there.
stimulation mentally for them, I
hmm
find we all have the client that we've been seeing for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And suddenly we're seeing them for a different reason. That before it was just fitness. Then all of a sudden it's low back pain, it's knee pain, it's a post-surgery, it's osteoporosis, it's something like that. And suddenly our goals have changed, but their mindset may not have because we're their buddy. They're still coming into
Right.
us. And now we've completely changed everything that we're doing, and they may not be on board. They like the variety at first, but then it's like, oh, this is hard. This is a lot
Right.
tougher. And with osteoporosis, suddenly, if you're doing all of a sudden, especially for Pilates, if you suddenly need to take them off the reformer for a good portion of their workout and get
hmm
them more weight bearing, where they're doing things that are going to stimulate, long bone growth, it may be uncomfortable for them. They're like, but why can't we just go and do what we've been doing? I like that.
hmm
I'm comfortable with that.
Right. And that's what I mean. Most people get ideally. I mean, again, those who are consistent get comfortable with their workout routine, whatever it is.
Yep.
Right? It was like, oh, I do 20 minutes of treadmill and I do this and I do that, whatever they do, like that's what they do. And people love regularity. I mean, we all know that. Our
Mhm.
clients kind of want you to be there every Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Like that's their thing. But with osteoporosis, you've got to be a little bit aware of not just doing the same thing in the same order for a period of time. Like you can do that
Yep.
to start and get their foundations up, get their movement quality appropriate for what you're trying to do. But then you've got to say, find ways to challenge it, add a little more load, add some more weight bearing, add maybe some hand weights or something, just ways to get different stimulation going into the body.
Variety is the key, and in every workout, I always try and add variety, just in general. But in this case, it is so, in my opinion, mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
And also not just one direction. We talk a lot about moving three-dimensionally. We talk a
Right. Not
lot
just
about that,
sagittally.
not just sagittally, because they do get locked into that. And let's face it, a lot of our homework is going to be sagittal because it's stuff that they can do at home, step ups, stand up, sit downs, squats, all of that kind of stuff. It's easy for them to do at home. And it's maybe something that they're willing to do. But when
And
they're
it's
with
safe and it's
us,
functional, right?
yeah, exactly. But when they're with us, we can push the envelope a little bit more. And we can
Mm-hmm.
do things like having them step to the side. The last client I just had, I have her stand on a 4-inch step and I have her step down with one foot and then bring it right back up to the top of the step and then step down and step up because she can't do a step up and over. Her body's not capable of doing that after a knee replacement, but she can step down and then back up. So guess what? That's a real beneficial exercise for her.
Yeah.
It's great. It's working lateral. It's working on that lateral stimulation that she doesn't get anywhere else in life.
Right.
So you need to sort of pick those exercises that they need, but may not be getting elsewhere.
So let's think about that in terms of the specific areas that we want to focus on. So
Mhm.
for sure, one place we want to focus is the hip.
Mhm.
Right? We want to really stimulate the hip joint because, yeah, spinal fractures we'll get to, but let's talk about the hip first because you really do want to stimulate the hip in as many ways as you can,
Mhm.
and from different angles. So that means, yes, certainly squats or footwork on the reformer, but not just parallel. Take it turned out. Take it with, take lungy kind of things, the one leg forward or one leg back if you're standing. On the reformer, parallel, turned out, turned in. I do all of those versions in footwork. One thing I do like about footwork, and I like to bring this up, is you are getting a nice load in footwork because you're getting both the load from the springs and you're getting compression through the shoulders.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you are getting, at least my feeling is, and certainly the feeling in the body is, you're getting a little more of those compressive forces,
Mhm.
without necessarily adding a whole lot more weight. So it's
Yep.
kind of like I feel like you get some good benefits out of something like footwork, where again you've got pressure on the top and kind of pressure from the bottom. So your skeleton is getting some of that axial loading, in a pretty simple, really safe exercise that you can modify as you need to. And again, that's a place to work parallel, turned out, turned in, single leg turned out, legs wide, all kinds of things, so that you're stimulating that hip. You're getting force into that acetabulum and into that femoral head and neck from all kinds of different angles. It's like, I love what you just said about doing that, side stepping. I do that as well. I'll use in the Pilates environment, I'll use a moon box.
Mhm.
And have somebody
Yep.
step up and just step down and step up and step down and step up and step down, sideways. I'll also have them doing step overs where they have the
Yep.
moon box sort of long ways. They step up and they step over it and back and over it and back. And I'll with all my osteoporotic clients and even just my older clients, I will always do 5 even to 10 minutes of standing at the beginning and or the end. Usually I'll do a little bit at the beginning as a warm up, and then I'll almost always finish with about 5 minutes of standing at the end, doing those kind of things, stepping up and over, doing some lunges, doing some squat kind of things. Just because I mean, regardless of whether they have osteoporosis or not, I want to work on balance, and I want to work
Mhm.
on really translating what we did in Pilates to an upright situation.
Also, this is one of those situations where open chain exercises don't work the same as closed
Yep.
chain because we want
Yep.
to have that load. So
Yep.
doing something for their hip abductors in a side lying position, or even standing and kicking a leg out. It's the standing leg that's getting the work, not the leg that's kicking out.
Exactly. The working
You're
leg, the leg that's moving isn't getting any of that stimulation because it's open chain.
exactly. So it's really the
Yeah.
closed chain position that we want to think about. Now, something that I will do in my world is I have a number of different weighted vests. So
Hmm.
I will want to increase their weight. I'm not a big fan of necessarily having them hold on to weights because
Uh-huh.
it might affect
You'd
their
rather have it
balance.
axially.
I like it loading axially also because it's going to be
Hmm.
pushing down in their shoulders in an even fashion. So it's not just one sided or the other, or if they happen to lean one way or the other, it takes that variability and narrows it a little bit. So I'm not worried as much about that for their
Hmm.
spine. So I can load them. I have everything from a 6 pound all the way up to a 22 pound, I think, weight vest.
Okay. Great.
And the 22 pound one is I can take weights, the ingots in and out. But I have a 6 pound and a 12 pound that are just one weight. You put it on. Clients don't even realize they have it on because it's fairly comfortable. The big one, it looks like a bulletproof vest, and it gets very hot. But the other one is rather light. It goes over the shoulders, and boom, they don't have to think about it. And I can do all of their standing exercises with just a little bit of weight. And remember, a lot of the clients who we're worried about with this are lighter weight individuals anyway. So putting a 10-pound weight vest on them, that can be a significant increase. That could be 10% of their body weight, or, you know,
Yeah.
8% or whatever it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
that we're increasing it without necessarily here, hold these 10-pound dumbbells, which based on grip strength, based on shoulders, they may end up shrugging. There's all sorts of things that may happen. The weight vest is an easy way to eliminate a lot of that. And then I can do sidestepping. I can do grapevines. I can do anything in a standing position. And I love doing things where they are walking sideways, walking up and over a small 6-inch hurdle or a rolled up towel, or doing a grapevine, stepping in front of one leg, then behind the leg.
Hmm.
All of these things are going to stimulate the hips, and they're in that closed chain position.
Which is really critical there. So that's where so thinking about how we modify or what we focus on. So I'm going to take us to the Pilates environment for a moment. When I'm working with somebody with osteoporosis and I'm taking the conservative approach, and I'm thinking of one client I had who already had 4 or 5 spinal fractures from
Mm,
osteoporosis and had like basically they sort of put cement in there to kind of hold the vertebra together. So this was not a client I was going to push the envelope on, okay? Because she
sure.
already had fractures. She was at high
Yep.
risk. She had her DEXA scans were like 4 or something. I mean, it was a
Ooh,
-4. It was not good. So in her case, like let's say with footwork, supine, I load her just what she's comfortable with, which in her case was like 3 reds. And we do footwork and I make sure that she is getting some load from the shoulder rests. And we
yep.
do kind of a lot. So we do heels, we do toes, we do V, we do wide, we do in, and we do like, and we do some single leg. So
Yep.
we do a lot of different positions for her. And we take maybe 10, almost even sometimes 10 or 12 minutes of her session just doing footwork. So we may do 20 reps. We may do a lot of different reps. She also is somebody who was happy to walk outside of our sessions, but not willing to do a whole lot else. She kind of was too nervous to do a whole lot else.
Sure.
So in that case, I really felt like this was the workout she was getting. And so, we'd work on that. Things like then going into knee stretch, right, is another closed chain. It's your hands, not your shoulders, but you still get some axial loading on that. Feet up on the shoulder rest and you're pushing back and forth. So you get some good hip work. Again, that's only sagittal. It's really hard to do knee stretch in any other way, but really sagittal.
Yep.
So it wouldn't necessarily work so much on that. I also found, and this is more from my work with clients with hip issues and hip replacements, is feet in straps, which I know is not. It's kind of semi-closed chain or whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it. It's not open chain. It's not really closed chain. You have some compression coming from that end. That's what I found is another one that I really work a lot of. External rotation, internal rotation, big circles, little circles, drawing little snowmen with your feet, taking little spirograph actions. So
Nice.
basically, they're stimulating their hip in 100 different ways with whatever that light load into the hip joint is. Because that's the other thing that I found, like for all my pre-hip replacement clients, they all do that. And many clients that has put off their hip replacement for months or sometimes
Oh yeah.
years with some of my clients, just to basically get hip stimulated in all those different ways. Really helps to keep arthritis at bay. It helps to keep the strength three-dimensionally around that joint.
Now, something that we talked about briefly last time, and I want to bring up here is shock. The shock
Yeah.
through the long bones, where there's some impact. And again, you can get that through walking even on a treadmill, you're gonna get some of that shock depending on how soft your treadmill is, okay?
Yep.
But walking outside is usually best just because you get your foot against that pavement or against that concrete, and you're gonna get some of that reverberation through those long bones. Now, how we can stimulate that in a gym environment or even a Pilates environment is through a jump board, or
Hmm.
I have a specific leg press, which is very similar to a reformer as well, where you can do jumps where I can lighten the load down to like 5 pounds all the way.
Uh-huh.
And that's not their body weight plus 5 pounds. We're talking literally just 5 pounds. And I can take it up to 700 pounds, which obviously you're not going to do for a jump. But for a client who may be afraid of fracturing, you don't want them to necessarily do a lot of jumping with their whole body weight because that's
No.
contraindicated.
Yeah. And they may
So
be terrified.
yeah, I can take them down to 5 or 6 pounds where they literally feel like, "Wow, this is barely even coming back." And on a
Right.
reformer, you put a yellow, well, it's gonna take a while for them to return.
Right. Actually, yeah.
Exactly, but you're gonna find what is the proper amount that's going to give them, even for little mini jumps, a little bit of that shock. Now, can I tell you my favorite exercise to give shock through the bones?
Yeah.
It's simple, and I've given it to a lot of my osteoporotic clients. I have them hold on to something, a wall or a countertop, have them go into a calf raise up on their tippy toes, and then just drop down onto their heels. Boom.
Uh-huh.
Go
So
up.
with a little bit of a boom, not a controlled drop, but really more
Right.
trying to get that.
And I have them start with a controlled drop. I have them start with so that they're
Mhm.
going boop, boop. It's more of a boop. And then
Uh-huh.
as they get comfortable, I'll say, okay, come down a little harder, just a little bit until they literally are bang coming down. And at first they're going to say, ooh, that's not very cool. After about 3 or 4 reps, they say, oh, that's easy. And I'll say, I want you to do it 10 times every day because it's going to give them something. It's body weight. It's body weight. It's providing that shock through their system, through their long bones. So they're going to get some stimulation and it can really help. And I found it's something because it's easy to do. Clients will do it at home. They'll do it
Yeah,
first
you
thing in
got
the morning when they're
compliance.
brushing their teeth or while making dinner or whatever. I get that compliance and I like that. And it really does help.
This reminds me of something which I haven't used with clients, so I'd be curious, if you start to do this. So there's that. One thing that I do a lot of times when I'm working on the foot and the ankle and stuff, mostly for my educators, is just to say, hey, walk on your heels.
Mm,
Just walk around the room on your heels, and you will feel how much more force is going through your system. Right? Like
yep.
it really feels like you're going bong, 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 bong. Like you're really getting that shock. So that's something too that I can give to my osteoporotic clients is just walk on your heels, just
Yep.
from here to the bathroom or when you're walking around the house, just walk on your heels because that will also send shock up. Like almost
Yeah.
immediately feel it quite quickly because the foot is a real shock absorber, and if you
Yep.
take the rest of the foot out, you really get that shock. One other thing, and this is just something that occurred to me because I was at the footwear store and I was playing with footwear. I just because of what works for me, I tend to use pretty minimal foot gear and I
Mhm.
really prefer stuff that's not very cushiony and pretty flat, just because that's what I'm used to. And also, I feel like that gives me more sensation of the floor, gives me better feedback. But I was also thinking about it because I was at Fleet Feet or whatever, and I said, well, what would you suggest for me? And they gave me a Hoka, which is a very popular running shoe at the moment.
Yep.
And I put on the Hoka, and it was like, oh, this absorbs all the shock that could be going through my
Yep.
system.
Yep.
So I had this moment of, what is this going to do in terms of bone stimulation? Like, especially for people who are using them just as walking shoes, like they're not even
Yep.
like running in them and adding just that potential impact of just speed
It's a good point.
and running. And I thought, well, that's interesting because you take that shock away and you're not getting that stimulation to the bones.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just another little moment in my head of like, not necessarily that everybody wants, minimalist kind of barefoot shoes. I understand that. But at least spend some time in bare feet and some time walking on your heels or doing the heel drops that Brian's talking about. Because if somebody has those super cushy shoes, they're not going to be getting that in their regular wandering around.
That's a great thing to bring up, because honestly, I hadn't put that 2 and 2 together until you just said it. I said, of course, because I'd say 50% of my clients are wearing hookahs or the QC, whatever,
Yeah.
however you
Yeah.
pronounce that also
Yep.
have a ton of that cushioning.
Yep.
And they're doing it because, oh, it makes my joints feel good. I'm like, I bet it does. But like you just said, you're not going to get that stimulation. You're not going to get that shock through the system. So that's a very good point that I hadn't even sort of thought of myself.
I mean, I wouldn't have, except that I do wear, I wear these really minimalist shoes. And so
Yeah.
I feel my heel hit the ground. And then I was playing with these, I walk in these hokas going, I'm walking on a mattress. Like there is no force, which I appreciate, sometimes, and I understand foot gear is foot gear and you got to do what's comfortable for you and all that. But it really was one of those moments of, wow, this is going to remove that
Yeah.
basic kind of fundamental force transmission up through my bones by absorbing
Yeah.
the force before it really hits my skeleton.
Yeah. Interesting.
Hmm.
Something else that I do with clients that we've talked about in other uh, podcasts, when we do things like the clock lunge and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I will do is I call it a controlled fall. So
Uh-huh.
I will
Yeah.
have them sometimes with my wooden dowels or whatnot, just so they have a little bit of balance control if they need it. But I'll have them lift one leg up and then go forward into a forward lunge. And will say, I want you, that front leg, to catch you. I don't want you to
Mm-hmm.
sort of bend that back knee immediately and sort of approach it slowly.
You
I
want
literally
them to
want you to go
fall.
forward and
Mm-hmm.
catch yourself and then push yourself back up, and then catch yourself and push yourself back up. And then I'll
Mm-hmm.
do a lateral lunge the same way. And I will say, I want the leg that you're standing on to stay straight the whole time, and literally let that leg that you're going to land on catch your body weight,
Uh-huh.
because you're really allowing the body to literally hold yourself up, and those muscles are going to get stimulated. They're going to get some of that, reverberation through them. They're going to get some elastic recoil as well, which is always
Mm-hmm.
beneficial. But then they have to, get themselves back up. So it's a way that I can stimulate both legs, because as I'm coming back up to even a slight balance point, I have to decelerate with my other hip. So I get a little bit of that, and I'm standing on that one leg. So I'm using both legs, but that catching myself is also very important. Good for fall prevention, for one.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a multi-purpose.
Yeah, it's great for balance and fall prevention, but also just getting that shock and reverberation. And also, as I'm launching myself forward, if I take a regular step, I'm catching my body weight. As I launch myself forward into a lunge and then have to catch myself, I have more force
Yeah,
coming
you've
into it.
gone up
It
a
takes
couple.
that up a little bit. So the
Yep.
muscles are going to be stimulated more, but also all those connections are going to be stimulated a lot more, because I'm increasing the amount of resistance that my body has to, contend with.
Nice. One other thing we talked about a bit last time that I just want to bring up. So, the hip for sure, and you have to add load to the hip. You just have to.
Yep.
Again, open chain isn't really going to do it, and even in Pilates, like think about adding load. Again, you have to go to four greens or whatever, but just really do think about that load is important there. You don't want to be like, oh yeah, I can do this all day. That's
Yep.
not going to be getting the stimulation that you need. But the other thing too is looking at how we load the spine. And I think this is where controversy for me comes in a whole lot more, because there's a lot of very safe ways to load the hips,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what I love about everything we're talking about is it's loading the hips, it's loading the long bones, it's also working on fall prevention. It's also
Yep.
working that ability to catch yourself should you trip, slip, fall, because the biggest fear of somebody with osteoporosis is I'm going to fall and break something. And
Yep.
if you can help them not be as likely to fall, you also solve some of their fear, from having osteoporosis. So all that I think is pretty straightforward. Anyway, that I think is pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the thing that where it gets trickier for me really is the core, and this is particularly true in Pilates, where
Yeah.
Pilates focus on the core tends to be very flexion centric. That's a little less true. Certainly now it's less true in personal training. I think personal training used to
100%.
know how to do crunches. Now they're like, yeah, crunches, what the heck? They'll do
Yep.
all kinds of other things instead, which is great. Actually, that's an improvement. But Pilates still has this really strong flexion bias. And so when a new Pilates teacher comes into the world and has an osteoporotic client, they're like, well, how am I going to get them to do 100 roll up, roll over, single leg stretch, like the basic Pilates mat work? And it's like, you're not. Like,
Exactly.
fundamentally, you're not. You have to, if you have a mat class that is a traditional, relatively traditional Pilates mat class, and a client comes in who says they have osteoporosis, that is not an appropriate class for them, period. So I'm going to be a little intent on that. It's just not. Like, just say this is not the right class for you. I offer a class, if you do or if somebody else does, that is osteoporosis safe. A Pilates based class is osteoporosis safe. Go take that class. Don't take this class. And the reason I say that is what we talked about at the very beginning, which is that a client will not know that they're in trouble until they break something.
Yep.
And the last thing you want is a client to break something in your studio or your clinic and be able to blame you for it. Like, that's
Yep.
just your gym, whatever. It's like, that is not a good scenario, right? For all kinds of reasons. So that's where, there are certain situations where I get really, really fussy. And one of them is
Hmm.
reformer classes and group mat classes. If it's not an osteoporosis safe class, like you're doing short spine, you're doing a lot of roll up and roll downs, you're doing a lot of flexion work with load, that's not an appropriate class for that client. And unless you can manage that client in that group, you don't have them in that class.
Yeah.
There we
And
go.
something to remind ourselves about, as well as our clients, is not every exercise is appropriate for every client.
Ever. I mean, ever.
Ever. And
Yeah.
that is something that I've actually had clients, come to me and say, well, I don't know why I can't do that. I don't know why I can't do this. And I said, it's not appropriate based on your condition. And I'll say, we may get there someday, but I've got 10,000 other exercises I can do that are going to stimulate
Yeah.
you similarly, that we're still going to get strength. We're still going to get whatever we're looking for, whatever the goal is. But you may not have to do that one thing or that one activity. Some people really want to play golf or play tennis or whatever. And guess what? It
Right.
hurts them every time they do. It may not be appropriate for the body that you're carrying with you today. A year from now, when you strengthen, it may be appropriate, but not today. Well, for
Right.
osteoporosis, there are a number of exercises. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients with severe spinal problems come to me and say, but I want to go back to yoga. And I'll say, well, okay. But all these poses that take you into extreme extension are now you're not allowed to do without consequence.
You mean
Or,
flexion?
well, for some people it's extension, for some people
Right. It
it's
could be. It
flexion.
could
I'm
be
just
either.
saying,
But
could be
yeah,
either.
I'm thinking of massive
For
forward folds and things like that. Yeah.
right, but in this situation, it would be the flexion. And there's a lot of flexion in Pilates and there is in yoga as well. So it's one
Hmm.
of those things that you just have to remind them that it's not appropriate for you. And it may be down the road. Who knows where you're going to be 5 years from now? You may reverse all of this, but for right now, that's not an appropriate exercise.
Right. And if you're working with, particularly speaking of yoga and Pilates, if you're working privately or you're working with a group that is, a class that's specifically for, yoga for seniors or something where it's osteoporosis safe, if you have osteoporosis, anybody out there listening, and you want to partake of one of these things, like, ask your teacher if this is appropriate for me.
Yep.
And if they look at you like they have no idea what you're asking them, don't go to that class. I mean, just to be blunt, it's like if they look at you like, oh, don't worry about it, yoga's good for everybody,
Yes.
or Pilates is
Yep.
great for everybody, like it's appropriate no matter what, that's just not true. Like, it's just
Mhm.
not true. So that's where I get a little about it, because you do have to be careful. And if you're doing privates with a qualified teacher of whatever kind, personal trainer, Pilates, yoga, whatever it is, that's a different story, right? There's somebody who's understands what osteoporosis is, knows how to work with it safely. That's great. but really check the qualifications of your practitioner or of the class before you jump into something new that you've never done before.
And these are also things that we can educate our clients about,
Yeah.
because I have clients who do have Pilates instructors outside of my facility. They can do it here, but they decide to do a reformer class or something else, or they have their, duet that they do with someone. Fine, perfect, perfectly good for that. But it's good for us to remind them these things are not good for your spine. So
Hmm.
these are the exercises to avoid, or these are the motions to avoid. I don't want you to go into flexion. I don't want you to do this. So you can tell, either I can contact their other instructor or that they can tell their instructor, but also make them their own best advocate, in that if they're
Yeah.
being told you really should do this exercise, do this, and they're like, no, I was told not to, that they can speak up and speak intelligently about it and say, that's contraindicated based on my condition. I don't think I feel comfortable doing that.
Hmm. Education is critical. And
Yeah.
and and I would also say, and we talked about this a lot and before we started today, is education without inspiring fear. Okay.
Yes.
This is a fine line. So many clients, we have both had clients, and I'm sure any of you out there who are trainers have had clients on all sides of that spectrum.
Mhm.
You've got the client who's like, I don't care. I'm going to do it, or I'm going to do anyway. To heck with osteoporosis. I'm going to do short spine, at least when I'm privately in my own room or with a teacher who doesn't care. Okay, fine. Or I'm going to play golf aggressively, or whatever it is. That it's just something not appropriate for that client. That's up to them because it is their
Mhm.
body. And all you can really do with those clients is say, well, based on what I know about this situation, you are putting yourself at greater risk for fracture, which can lead to disability and all kinds of other things. So
Yep.
you can say that point blank, like, this is what I see. You're welcome to do whatever you want. And I've had that conversation with clients, or I've had to say, it's like, well, I want to keep doing short spine. It's like, it feels so good. It's like, you cannot do short spine in my facility.
Yep.
Like, if I'm here, or if any of my other teachers are here, they will not let you do short spine here. If you've got a reformer at home, do whatever you want to do. I can't stop you, but I am going to tell you that that will increase your risk of fracture. And,
Yep.
if you want to take that risk, that's between you and you.
Yep. And that's something that you have to I'm constantly reminding clients that there are both positive and negative consequences to all of our actions.
Right, right. There you go.
And uh, the first time I really brought this up it was in a class where I was teaching something about the meniscus, and I had a CrossFitter who was, I have to do plyometrics. I have to do plyometrics. I just have to. And I said, look, go for it. It's your body. I can't tell you what to do with it. Just know that there are consequences, and that there's a possibility that you may be risking future potential issues. And when it comes to this, if I have someone who has osteoporosis and wants to continue to do certain activities that I deem are unhealthy, I'm going to tell them that there may be a risk. And I may not put the fear of God into them like a physician might, but I might say, you're going to be risking potential injury and, like you said, possible disability down the road by doing these activities. But it is your body. I just won't have you do them in my facility.
Mhm.
And they have to respect that.
So with that in mind, that's a fear of God moment,
Yeah,
right? Because I mean, there is. I mean,
we
there
have to
are
educate
real
them.
consequences. The statistics are something like 25% of people over some age, actually maybe it's even 50% at this point, will end up with an osteoporosis related fracture in their lifetime. Like, it's really huge.
Yep.
Now, some of that is they're 85, they trip on some ice, they break a hip, whatever. But that's not all of it, right? Some of it is like my client who was like in her 60s and had 3 spinal fractures,
Yep.
and then she could live for another 30 years with those three spinal fractures, which cause daily discomfort. So a couple things. One is, and this is where I'm gonna start getting a little controversial here. I think we'll see.
All right.
One of them is, actually, I'm going to start with conservative. So if I want to get the core activated, all right, I don't have to actually move the spine very much.
Yep.
Okay, so let's kind of be clear on that. And there's a lot of ways to activate the core and activate the abdominals by moving the limbs,
Yep.
You know, by doing like moving yourself out of gravity like you do in a suspension trainer, like playing with any kind of versions of plank work, whether it's
Yep.
on the wall or on the floor or in different tools, like all those things are going to activate your core and really quite effectively. So when I'm really working with an osteoporotic client, I find all kinds of ways to get their core working that don't involve flexing, extending, rotating, or laterally flexing the spine.
Mhm.
Again, just by putting force into different, I'm just a side plank. Like I'll have them do side planks on the wall if they can't start it, and then they do it on the floor. Maybe we end up working with kind of modified versions even on the reformer. So I'm getting that whole side body to wake up and that side core, lateral core to wake up without having to move the spine. You know, any kind of inversion stuff, whether it's again using a suspension trainer or in the Pilates environment, if you have a tower or a trap table or a springboard, taking hold of the straps and just preaching them forward and leaning into them and coming back like you would on a suspension trainer. As soon as you go forward, boom, that core wakes up. Turning around, leaning backwards. As soon as you lean,
Yep.
boom, the core wakes up. So there are creative ways to get all that happening. Even feed-in straps where you have to keep the torso steady, the low back steady, the pelvis in place, but you're taking this big lever and moving it away from you and towards
Exactly.
you, you'll get some abdominal activation. So lots of ways to play with that. And I really encourage you, if you work with osteoporotic, to think about that, like what stimulates the abdominals without moving the spine.
And we talked a lot about this in the past when we've had our, episodes on the low back where we
Right.
spoke about core training with a dynamic lumbopelvic position. You put them in
Mhm.
the safe position, which for this will be in, a neutral spine position.
Yeah.
And you want to begin to train them, but make sure that they are aware of where their spine is and keep them there. So if they're in a plank,
Mhm.
they can be in a plank forward, back plank, side plank. You can have them do it off a wall. You can have them do it off of a ladder. You can have them do it off the foot bar of there's a multitude of ways that you can have them do this. What I love about this is, especially in a straight arm position, is you're also going to be strengthening their wrists, their
Yes.
forearms, their
Yep.
their humerus,
Yep.
which, let's face it, a lot of our older clients don't like to be in a hands on the ground position. It's just not very
Mhm.
comfortable on their wrists. So to
Yep.
put them in a position where they're leaning on a foot bar or even on the ladder where it's a rounded or cylindrical
Or
thing for
they
their
can
wrist.
grip instead of being in wrist extension, which is often uncomfortable. Yeah.
Exactly, but it's loading through the bone.
Mhm.
It feels more comfortable, but it's a way for me that I can say, okay, at least I'm loading them in this position. So they're going to get that strengthening through those long bones. Again, long bones are not just our femur and our tibia. We're also talking
Right.
about our forearms, our
Yeah.
upper arm, humerus, radius. Those are all the other bones that we need to think about as well as the spine. And
And
by
those
taking
also put load into the spine,
and I was just going to say, they put a
which
direct load into the spine in all of
yeah.
those positions. Now, we talked in our last episode, I mentioned all of the derotation work with bands
Mhm.
and tubing and all of that. All of that is loading the core in in basically a statue or a plank type position that's not necessarily in a forward position, like a front plank or off of something. You're more in a standing position. So, guess what? You're not only getting spinal work, you're also going to be getting load bearing on the legs, especially if you're doing any sidestepping or forward or back or any of that while holding onto a tube with the arm straight ahead. So there are so many variety of ways that we can stimulate the core without necessarily having them go into a forward flex position.
Right. And one other thing I would bring up in the Pilates environment is kneeling side arms, basically on the reformer, right, where
Mm,
you're kneeling, and you're just taking this strap across or up or down or various different ways. So you're loading the core and trying to keep it stable. So again, that's another kind of, I would go beyond just a derotation exercise, but it's a
yep,
torso stabilizing exercise against weird loads, either
yep.
going up or going across or pulling or whatever you're doing. So that's
Yep.
another way, it's that sort of a reformer version of some of the statue work that Brian talks about. I love what you do. I think it's really great to have that dynamic load and to do it in standing.
And also for someone who may not be able to kneel because of a knee position, you can modify that
Mhm.
by using the sitting box,
Exactly. Yep.
So
Just sit
there
sideways.
yeah, there's a multitude of ways Really, I mean, a lack of imagination is the only limitation you have in a lot of these situations because you can really load the spine in so many different ways, and you should in all of these ways,
Hmm.
not just in flexion. We learned a long time ago in fitness that crunches, while they may help, tone your abs a little bit, it's not a very specific exercise and not very functional exercise except for doing it once, getting out of bed, getting out of a supine
Right.
position, sitting
Right.
yourself up, very functional. 200 repetitions, not that functional.
No. No, exactly. So what other little thing that so moving this into, we've talked a little bit about the spine and doing it in a neutral position. And again, great ideas there. Like you can make a whole session without ever having to go into flexion. I mean, all the kneeling abdominal series on the
Absolutely.
reformer. It's like they're easy ways to get that load going through the spine without moving the spine. So
Yep.
that's one piece there. But then the other thing, and we talked a little bit about this last time, but I'm going to bring it up here when we talk about practical stuff, is I'm also thinking about, okay, imagine putting your shoes on without flexing your spine. Okay.
Mhm.
Unless you've got like the world's most flexible hips, which most people at that point in their life do not, you're going to have to flex your spine. And you may be sitting and you may whatever, but like you're going to be flexing your spine to get your foot on or get your socks on. So the other thing too is how do I develop in a relatively unloaded way? And I think that's something that has not been well defined. So what I'm talking about here is like kind of making it up, just to be clear on that. How do we load some of that, get some rotation going, get clients to be able to do some light flexion with the minimal load possible so that we maintain strength for their functional activities?
Yeah. Yeah. That's like you said, we are now tipping the spectrum towards controversial.
We're going into controversy.
We're
Yep.
going to
Last 15
controversy
minutes.
now. Yeah, I was gonna say we've covered a lot of the conservative because though
Mhm.
all the things we've talked about up until now are all things you can do with a client very safely. You can teach them how to do some of this stuff at home.
Yep.
And especially if you're working with them one-on-one, you can keep them very safe. Now, let's talk about reality. Let's talk about real life, all the things that they're going to need to do. Getting in and out of cars, getting up and down off the toilet, putting on your shoes, getting out of bed. All of these things are going to involve some flexion and some rotation. And the question is, do we never train it again and hope they get some overlap and some of that crossing that they're going to get it with all of our other stuff? Or do we add in a little bit in a safe environment, in a relatively unloaded position, or as unloaded as we can keep them? And I lean more towards that myself because I need my client to be functional.
Right. And we talked about this a little bit last time, but just a reminder, the lack of specificity, right? Like what we train is what we train,
Mhm.
period.
And that's what we get strong at.
That's what we get strong at. And so again, like if you train lying down, then you get good at lying down and moving your legs or whatever it is. If you do squats sagittally, you get good at that. Um, Skills don't necessarily translate beyond the exact thing you do, which is horrifying in some ways because it really means you've got to be pretty creative a lot of times. But in
Mhm.
this case, it's like how can I just get some rotation happening? So one of the things that I work on is basically upright full body rotation. So for example, just standing, I'll have people just stand, bend the knees, right. So the knees are a little bit bent. That takes some stress off all the joints. And then just takes from standing upright a nice, easy rotation, just side to side, just a nice, like the arms are swinging, you're just rotating. And the hips are moving, the knees are moving, the spine is moving, the shoulders are moving, the neck and the head are all moving. The idea here for me is I'm trying to create a coordination of rotation that spreads the load out as much as possible.
Yeah.
And partly why I say that here is because in Pilates, a lot of rotations are done with the pelvis stable and the thorax rotating.
Yep.
Right now, number one, that's not that functional for a lot of actual like rotational activities. But number two, that's going to put the load into the spine. And if I've got somebody with osteoporosis, I don't want that load to build up at any one particular spot. I want it to be just like moved over all of those joints. So everybody's taking part of the load. And that generally means that that load isn't going to build up anywhere. So
Mhm.
that's often where I start, is just a nice, easy, and they can do it as small and as gentle as they want, but I want to look at that coordination of hips, knees, torso, shoulders, neck, head, the whole piece working together smoothly and consistently.
Yep. I like the way you put that. With a lot of clients, I will have them, first of all, I use this term a lot, moving at the speed of life.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to go at a natural pace. I don't want them to go
Yeah.
too slow. I don't want them to go too fast. I want them to feel like whatever we're doing is natural. Well, the same thing happens when I have them do anything involving rotation or anything like this. I tell them, make it like a dance. I want it to be smooth. I don't want to see a jerkiness and have it stop anywhere. Just
Mm-hmm.
allow your body to turn. And what I'll do is I'll usually start in something like a row with a single arm row with a band or something like that, where the
Mm-hmm.
band is attached to something and they're just pulling. And I'll say, okay, just pull. And that's all I'll say. I'll show them one time, two times, and then have them do that. And I'll say, okay, now increase your range of motion a little bit. Just see, does it feel comfortable to turn your shoulders just a little bit? How about your hips? Do they just want to move just a little bit? And you'll see them begin to get comfortable and their whole body begins to move in a very fluid way. And that's what I'm looking for. I want that fluidity. And I'll change their foot position, sometimes one foot forward, then I'll switch to the other side so that now their hips can open instead of being locked into a position. And I'll say, just go with what feels comfortable. So if they do have fear and they don't want to turn their shoulders very much, it's like, that's okay for today. The more they get comfortable with it, they're going to turn and they say, oh, okay, this is all right. Because, and I bring this up to a lot of people, there's going to come a time when you're going to have to open a door that's going to be heavier than you think,
Mm-hmm.
that you're
Right.
going to grab it and pull. And guess
Yep.
what? You've got to engage your core, your hips, your shoulder. You're going to rotate. And if you're not strong enough to do that, the weakest link is going to be what's going to break.
Right.
And I don't want any link to break. I want them to be
Right.
able to anchor themselves, pull that door open, and walk on through.
Yep, and
There's
you
a
want that whole chain to be participating, right? I love
everything.
the link and the chain concept there, because
Yep,
basically, if you've locked your hips and you're kind of doing it all, or you do it all from your shoulder, you get shoulder issues. You do it all from your torso, you get torso issues.
yep,
Yeah. So how do you make the whole chain consistent?
yep. And fluidity is the way that I explain it.
Hmm.
Because some
Yeah,
people say, I can't dance. I can't, I'm not a dance. I can't dance.
doesn't
It's like
matter.
you're not dancing. You just want to be fluid. And sometimes I have to bring it up in sports and say, you know, how does your golf swing look? Is it choppy or is it fluid? Oh, it's fluid. Okay. Or how about this? How about, I try and throw something into it that they're going to recognize and say, oh, say, just make it fluid. Just make it fluid. And when they do and they feel it, what often happens is they say, wow, the resistance feels way too light now.
Right, because you added so many more links to the chain. Instead of
Yes,
doing it with basically your arm muscles, which is what most people
exactly.
do, you've got the whole core involved, the hips involved, the legs involved, and that's about roughly 75% of the power that ends up in your arm comes not from your arm and your shoulder, it
Yep,
comes from the rest of you, depending on,
exactly.
that's a random statistic there, so don't quote me on that.
Exactly. And I like the fact that you were mentioning doing it in a standing position. I will often also, if I want to train any flexion, I'll try and find the most unloaded position possible. So I may have them do cat and cow, something where
Mhm.
they're just going to do a simple rounding and extending. And for me, that's just getting nutrients to the spine. That's just working
Yeah.
those discs. It's just keeping the spine as healthy as possible through some motion. And it's fairly unloaded because they're in a hands and knees position, quadruped position. And I'm also going to get, guess what? The hips are going to get some weight bearing. The wrists are going to get some weight bearing. The arms are. So it's also going to be beneficial for that as well. So it's an easy way to do that. And then I might be able to figure out other ways to get them to do a little bit more flexion that's going to be safe for them.
One thing I love to thank you for bringing that up, because one of the things that I do with really all my back clients is Basic all fours warm up. So cat cow for flexion and extension. Because I find in all fours, people don't go past what they're comfortable with. Like they're
Right.
very much in control. It's relatively unloaded. It's really the best way that I've found to move the spine for somebody who's sensitive. And then even doing tail wag,
Tail
our
wag.
Pilates version of lateral flexion and hip movement. And then what Brand taught me was chicken wings, which is a simple rotation
Yep.
exercise, one hand behind the head, other head down, and that elbow goes towards the opposite elbow and back up. So all of those are, in my experience, relatively unloaded and relatively gentle. So if I've got somebody with osteoporosis or something with any kind of spinal issue, I'll do those because that also tells me what they're moving, it's a great assessment tool, what they're moving, what they're not, how things are going for them, where their pain points are, like they can't push this way, they can't push that way. And it gives me a lot of information, both assessment wise, pain wise, and gives them a very simple series of exercises they can do at home.
Yes. Yep. So we're not going to dive too deep into controversy. And the reason is I don't think either Nora or I feel comfortable giving you permission necessarily to here, try this with your client, because no, we're telling you what we do under very safe conditions and with as minimal amount of load on the spine as possible when it comes to flexion or rotation.
Right.
Because we want to make sure that the client is safe at all times. Now, something else to think about when looking at that spectrum of controversial to conservative is where are they on the osteopenia versus osteoporotic, spectrum as well?
Right, right. Because it's not black and white, and there's been a
No.
lot of well documented inconsistencies in terms of the scans. The scans are they're useful, but don't take them as gospel. I mean, really,
Yeah.
don't take them as gospel. You can have a lot of errors in there, one way and the other. Right. So somebody can be very osteoporotic, like a, -3 or -4 or something. And then they can be really just a little
Very
bit of osteopenic, -0.5 or something.
right.
That makes a big difference. And as we talked about last time, where their numbers are worse also makes a difference. Is it hip? Is it spine? Is it wrist? That tells you a lot also about what you can and can't do safely or what you should focus on.
And remember, a client may come to you and say, I'm osteoporotic. I had a client tell me this. I have
Right.
osteoporosis. And it was part of their story. And I said, I want you to get me the chart. I want to see the DEXA scan, and I want to see the results. Well, guess what? They were only osteoporotic in their spine. Their hip
Mm,
was strong as an ox, not even
right.
close. Their wrist, not even close. It
Yep.
was only their spine. So guess what? That changed in my mind my programming. It wasn't I need to
Exactly.
do the whole body. It's like, okay, well, you're fine in these other areas. I can do a lot. It opens things up. But now at L3, yes, we're seeing some, in the DEXA scan. Okay. So we have to watch this. We have to keep those contraindications. So don't assume, that they have it in all the areas, and don't assume that they don't have it in all the areas. Look at the
Exactly.
DEXA scan and see where they're at. It's also a great way for you to know whether or not your programming is working, because if you don't have
Right.
it, you can't tell.
Yeah, and they tend to rescan about once a year has been
Yeah,
my experience usually. So you won't know for a while because they're not going to rescan every 3 months or whatever. They'll tend to be about once a year. But just again, really good to know. Like that's kind of your report card. Did it
yep,
work or did it not work? And are we staying steady, which is pretty good, or are we improving? That's even better. Or are we not improving? And that's also all good to know. One
yep.
last little thing, which we haven't said yet. Again, one of the many things we haven't said is the key thing that a lot of times people work on is posture, and honestly, posture is a key
Big
thing.
time.
And back, not even I'm not even saying back extension. I'm saying maintaining the strength of the back. So I
Mhm.
love doing things that are prone, especially like over a ball if it's appropriate on the chair. I do all kinds of prone stuff on the chair in the reformer, or I mean in Pilates land, or on the long box, because
Mhm.
just holding yourself in that flat position. I'm not necessarily moving into extension. Sometimes that's too much, but just holding yourself in a straight line on something like a box or a ball or whatever is a wonderful amount of work for all those muscles right around the spine. And remember, it is spinal, it's muscular activation that encourages bone growth. So that's another thing to think about too, is make sure that you do a lot of, it doesn't even have to be extension in terms of the movement of the spine. It can just be holding that position with, your body, the upper part of your body off the chair, your lower part of your body off the ball,
Yep.
whatever you're doing there to try to get that back, to get some stimulation all the way through that back chain.
I'm glad you brought that up. Absolutely. Posture, posture, posture. That's going to help out a ton with this because, again, a forward flex kyphotic posture is much more likely to have an issue than someone who is not kyphotic. So, yes, work on that posture. And yes, you can stimulate the erectors without going into extension. So there are multitude of ways to do that. And we covered a lot of that in episodes past when we talked about the low back. So thank you. I'm glad you brought that up before we wrapped up. So excellent. And I think we covered a lot today. There's a lot I think we gave you a lot of things to think about.
Yeah. Hopefully
And to
some
really focus
planning,
on.
some program plans or some thoughts or some strategies.
And again, these are just ideas. And with any of the types of programming ideas that we give you, we're hoping to stimulate your thought process so you can create more. It's not, here's the 10 exercises that you're going to do forever. No, these 10 exercises hopefully will open you up to 100 more exercises. And that you're going to be able to come to us and say, check this out. When we see you at a conference or something, you say, check this exercise out. And we're going, oh, awesome. I can't wait to use that myself. So that's really what this is about, is stimulating that for you to become more creative.
You're right. Once you understand the principles, right, that's the key. If you understand what you're trying to do, then how do you do that in movement? That's the fun part of our job.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you guys very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. As always, hit the like and subscribe button for the platform of your choice. Movingconvos@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with us. But do hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the comment. Tell us what you like. When we talk about this, give us your favorite exercise, whether it's one that we suggested today, or maybe you're doing something that we're not. Put it in the comments. We really appreciate it. And it really helps us get the word out to more people. So please do that on Instagram, especially. Moving Convos is our Instagram handle. So check us out there. And until next week, for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye, guys.